Hey, it's me, Egbert. E-G-G-B-U-R-T. Check out my website at egbert.com. Now it's back to those two dudes who told me they would bring in big ratings. They better are their history. Here are Brad and John.
It is the BJ Show, by the way. We do this show live. It is live right now. Not if you're listening on the tape delay or the podcast or the show of the BJ Show.video. That is obviously not live, but we do the show live between 7 and 8 Central Time every morning, Monday through Friday. Okay, the Times Beach story. Ready for this?
I am, yeah.
The reason I know a little bit more about this than the average bear is that my grandfather-in-law, this was my wife's grandfather, worked for the St. Louis Star-Times, which at the time we had the Globe Democrat, we had the Post-Dispatch, we had the St. Louis Star-Times. Star-Times has been long gone from the St. Louis area. They decided they were going to try to get more subscriptions. So what they did was they bought a piece of land out in southwest St. Louis County, which is what used to be Times Beach, and they incorporated it as Times Beach. Because the reason they called it Times Beach was the Merrimack.
Oh, Brad, I've never heard that story before.
The Merrimack River runs through Times Beach. That's part of the reason how it got polluted. If you know the whole crazy story, Russell Bliss sprayed his oil, contaminated with dioxin. Then we had a flood, and the water went everywhere, and they essentially cleared out the town. When you're driving west, for those of you who don't even know this, when you're driving west in 44, as you're coming down Antire Hill, as you approach Williams, there used to be a little sign right there, entering Times Beach. Times Beach was notorious because of the fact that the cops from Times Beach, which sit up on 44 and run radar all the time, and if you were going 2 miles over the speed limit, you got a ticket. Okay, so the Star-Times bought this piece of property out there. They incorporated the town as Times Beach. You know, once again, the newspaper was Times, St. Louis Star-Times. It was the beach in Merrimack River. And when you bought a subscription to the paper, you got a piece of Times Beach. They subdivided the property that they owned, and you literally got a deed for a small parcel of property. I think it was like a foot square. True story. And
that's amazing.
Now, I've been toying with the idea, and I'm going to float this right now. The crap transmitter site, right there on Highway 47. We have 8 acres, mile north of the Missouri River, right across from the Washington Airport. I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to, somehow legally subdivide it and get deeds for a square foot. And then what will happen is when you buy, a subscription to the radio station, you get a piece of crap. What do you think?
That's brilliant. Now, didn't you do, in my research before we did this show, Brad, not today's show, but back last fall, didn't you have something similar to this before? Didn't you run, buy a piece of crap or something like that?
No, we ran a campaign where we were trying to raise money for our news station 107.1, and we ran a campaign called Give a Crap. And
oh, okay. And I thought you had some kind of a sale at one point where you could buy a piece of the radio station. Am I making that up? Was that with the mouth, or I thought that was with crap?
No, we never bought a piece of the radio station, because the problem with that is it gets very complicated, because
I'm sure legally, yeah, well, it didn't seem like it was on the up and up.
No, because of the FCC thing. I mean, you have, you can't. I can't just say, hey, John, meet me in the parking lot and I'll sell you the radio station today. It has to be approved by the FCC and stuff like that. Whereas a piece of real estate, I can meet you in the parking lot and say, John, here's the deed of trust. Sign right here. You own this piece of real estate.
Why don't we? Here's what we could do, though. Why don't we, instead of doing that at the crap transmitter, why don't we just buy a parcel at the former Times Beach? And then everybody can say that they got some kind of dioxin.
Well, because
whatever health. Why can't we?
Because you can't buy it. They took it.
That's right. Is that who owns that property now?
I believe it's the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. It's owned by the state or the county or something like that, and that's why you can't buy it. Essentially, it's there's pieces of property, like for example, out in the Weldon Spring area, when you get there on Highway 94, there's a whole stretch of Highway 94. Once you get south of the high school, there's a whole stretch where there's nothing there. And remember, I haven't told you that.
They're not selling it. Yeah,
right. I haven't told you the story. There's a as you get down, if people who drive that know what I'm talking about, the waterworks down there in 94, about halfway between the high school and where where 94 branches off into Double D, and then you're on your way into Defiance. There's a cemetery there, and people go like, "Why is there a cemetery in the middle of nowhere?" That is the former it still is the cemetery for the city of Hamburg, which no longer exists. And if you know your history, back in World War II, there were, I believe, 3 cities along Highway 94 there. One was called, and it has an interesting name, one was called Toonerville, Toonerville, and there was Hamburg, and there was a third one. And the U.S. Department of Defense, was whatever, I guess it was the War Department back then, it wasn't the DOD, they needed an area where they can make bombs and refine uranium and all that crazy stuff. And they literally went in and took all that property, and there are somewhere archived in St. Charles County in the library, there are pictures of government agents literally pulling people out of their houses at gunpoint because people said, "We're not leaving. You can't take our property. This is not proper," and they wiped out the town, but they left the cemetery. So the last people that if you go out to that cemetery there on 94, the last, I think probably the last dates you'll see in that cemetery are in the late 30s or early 40s when people were buried there. See, what's weird about that is there are bizarre little cemeteries all over the place. In a subdivision, I think I mentioned this to you one point in time. There's a subdivision out in St. Charles County. It's actually, I believe, in Weldon Spring called Camelot, and in one of the cul-de-sacs.
Camelot.
Yeah, when you go in one of the cul-de-sacs, it's way back in the back of the subdivision, there's a cemetery that's the center of the cul-de-sac. And the reason I know this is years ago when they first built Camelot, my wife and I were looking to buy a house there, which we kick ourselves we didn't because it got to be a huge, very successful. And when they first started, the prices were reasonable, and then they went to a lot of them went to high 6 figures, some even 7 figures. When we were touring the property, none of the roads were built, and the guy gave us this map. This is what it's going to look like, and I'm driving around in my Bronco. I had a Bronco at the time, and I'm going like, "There's a cemetery down there. What are you going to do with that cemetery?" And the guy, "Well, that's going to be in the middle of a cul-de-sac." I thought he was kidding. And the reason I know about that is every Halloween, one of the TV stations goes out there. The last time I saw it was like 2 years ago. Channel 5 goes out there and they interview the neighbors. "How is it that you've got dead people living across from your house in the cul-de-sac?" And the people take care of the cemetery. They maintain it. There's another little cemetery right off of Central School Road, right behind an office building. And matter of fact, I've walked through that cemetery before, and I believe the last dates you see anybody buried in that cemetery were like the late 1800s, and I believe that was the Maxwell family. It's sort of weird, back in the day. If you had a family and you had a piece of property and one of your family members died, you'd literally bury them in the backyard. But nowadays, you'd get thrown in jail for that. They wouldn't approve of that at all. You don't have a permit. You're burying a corpse without a license
you aren't licensed by the Professional Registration of Corpse Buriers.
Right. Which maybe that's what Jay Ashcroft would become.
Yeah, did we ever figure out, when it comes down to Times Beach, did we ever figure out whether the dioxin concerns were overblown? Like, that's one of the bottom lines that I never remember getting an answer to.
Well,
so, what do you think about it?
Well, there's a lot of things. To me, this is the thing, like with the global warming, okay? I saw recently a picture of, matter of fact, it's sort of weird how a guy showed me a picture of the old, at the time it was the old 550 KSD transmitter site, which is still in use today. It's over in Illinois. It's just a little bit east of East St. Louis. And the picture was taken from the south to the north, and it showed the towers. And what was interesting was it also showed these huge plumes of black smoke, and that was coming out of the steel mills in Granite City, because Granite City is to the north of where that transmitter site is. And you don't see that anymore. So my point being that once upon a time, we did pollute, and we polluted, maybe, bad to horribly polluted, okay? We don't do that anymore. But the environmentalists have got to the point where they if the standard is 3 points per billion, they'll go, "Well, it needs to be 3 points per trillion." And it gets to the point where it's like, okay, when is it enough? There's a classic bit that you can watch on YouTube. It's gotten gazillion views of John Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy, the dude from Louisiana, where he's grilling one of these guys about the fact, okay, you're saying if we spent this amount of money, we're going to do this. And he keeps hammering this guy, how much money will it cost us to stop global warming and to turn it around? And he keeps hammering the guy. Well, the answer is they don't know, and that's what Kennedy says. And the point on that is it's gotten to the point where like if you compare a current car, an ICE car, an internal combustion engine, one that's got an engine where you put gasoline in it. If you compare that car today with the tailpipe emissions of a car that's 20 years ago, and even 20 years ago we had pretty strict air pollution standards. It's super clean. But the problem is, to the environmentalists, it will never be clean enough. That's where the whole thing about we need all electric cars. And the fallacy of that is, if you live in the St. Louis area, you charge your electric car, you're using power by coal, which is like, okay, let's think about this for a minute. And not only that, it's to the point where we don't have the infrastructure for it, and it's just the point where you go like, and yet these people are like, and see, that's what sort of scares me about the situation you've got right now. And what happens is, it's like the crazy thing. Here's another goofy story, okay? I will tell you this story, and this involves the radio station and the crap transmitter site, okay? At the crap transmitter site, we have like a 2 or 3 acre lake, okay? You know how that lake got there?
No, I don't.
Back in 1973. The back part of the property is a levee. It's a flood control levee, the Dutso Bottoms levee or something like that. And in 1973, the levee broke right there. And when levees break, typically, it's not what you think. It's not that they break at the top. Typically what happens is, at least in the Midwest, is the ground becomes saturated and the bottom of the levee blows out. What happens is and then what happens is you have this huge inrush of water, and it digs an even bigger hole. The water comes rushing in, and as it's rushing into that hole, it's digging a hole, digging a hole, digging a hole, digging a hole. My lake at the crap transmitter site was a result of the levee breaking in 1973. And like I said, it's probably, depending upon, sometimes when the river comes up, that lake will be 30 or 40 feet deep. Okay. Back in the Obama administration, the EPA passed this rule that they said that they are in control of any body of water that's navigable. Now,
it was WOTUS, Waters of the United States.
Right. And you probably know this from your agricultural
I know
thing.
it very well, yeah.
And back in the day, when you said navigable, you mean like the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, right? Where you can put a barge on it, or you can put your Bayliner boat on it, and drive around. And what happened was they essentially declared everything that had water in it as navigable. So when we had some stuff that we had to do at the transmitter site, I actually had to get approval from Missouri Department of Natural Resources, Corps of Engineers, all these various things. And I actually, still in my files, I have a letter from, I believe it's from the U.S. Coast Guard, and also I sent like pretty much the same letter from the U.S. Coast Guard and the Department of Natural, or was Coast Guard and I can't remember who the other one was.
The Merchant Marines.
Oh, no, Corps of Engineers and Coast Guard. Corps of Engineers, Coast Guard. And they sent me a letter with the map of my transmitter site with the lake outlined, saying I cannot do anything to that lake. I can't do anything on the shores. You know what I'm talking about with the stuff with the agricultural stuff. It was to the point where
it's nuts.
It was not unusual for farmers to grab their bulldozer to put in if they had like some rolling countryside, to put in a little dam, and that would be where they would water their cattle. Right? Am I kidding about this?
Yep, you're exactly right. Yeah.
And all of a sudden the EPA comes along and says. And like then for some reason, let's say the farmer didn't want to have that area anymore. He'd just, run his bulldozer through the dam and the water would flow out and he'd build a new one somewhere. That became illegal. If you got caught, breaking a dam on your own property, even though the watering, the surface area of the water was maybe, 100 feet by 100 feet, relatively small. And once again, they declared that navigable because you know why? You can put a kayak in it and you can row across the water. John, am I kidding or what?
No, you're absolutely right about that. Essentially, if you had anything larger than a puddle,
Yes.
it was under the domain of the administration. Brad,
Yes.
are there fish in your pond?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, no way.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it sounds like we should have a fall fishing day at the crap
Well,
transmitter.
John, I'll tell you one better.
Yeah.
That my middle son, I think it was my middle son, was amazed at this. I guess probably about 11 or 12 years ago, we had beavers show up in our pond, okay? And
Oh, wow.
what was interesting
And you
is,
mean the animal?
yes, and what was interesting about it was on one side of you have to go and take a look at it. One side of the lake, a bunch of trees had grown up, and they were relatively young trees. I'd say they're probably maybe 5 to 10 years old. Okay, and we're talking like 50, 60 of them. And it's this point where I didn't cut. It's down by the lake, so I didn't cut it. So I took my son down there one day. We're doing something I can't remember, and all of a sudden I noticed the trees are all gone. I mean, there's not one. I'm not exaggerating. There's not
You
one.
thought it was a rogue logger.
No, there's not one single tree left. They're all gone. And my son and I walked down there and look at every last one of them had been eaten by the beavers. And you can see where they eat and they eat
That's
up.
awesome.
Okay, and they took the branches and they put them in the lake and they made their beaver den. Well, here we go. You're not going to believe this story, okay? And this is honest God true story. Somewhere in my files I have this letter. A guy one day calls me and he says to me, "Let me tell you who I am. I am an executive for AT&T." He worked downtown. I mean, we're talking, this guy was, I looked him up in the corporate hierarchy. He was way up there in the corporate hierarchy. And he says, I have a weekend home out in Marthasville. And he says, when I go by your transmitter site, I've seen that you have beaver activity there. And I go, yeah, I do. And he says, my hobby is I trap beaver. And I go, what? And he goes, I trap beaver. I said, and he says, I would like you to give me permission to trap beaver on your property. True story. I'm not kidding.
What'd you tell him?
Well, I said to him, I said, look, I got some issues there. We've got it marked as no trespassing because we've got the situation with the towers and radio frequency radiation, and I don't want anybody in the property. He said, I will have my attorney draft an agreement which will give you 100% indemnification. If I fall and kill myself on your property, if I drown in your lake, you're off the hook. So I'm going like, yeah, right. Okay, fine. So about a week later in the mail from I think it was like Brian Cave or something like that, a letter shows up in the mail. I'm going, oh, I'm in trouble. It's this guy's attorney sending me out, dear Mr. Hildebrand, my client, Mr. blah, 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 has requested that I send you this indemnification letter. So I said, okay, dude, knock yourself out. So we went down there and trapped beaver. And the crazy thing is, ever since he's done that, I've never had another one back. And him and I talked for a couple years. We sort of became, like sort of phone buddies. We'll talk back and forth from time to time and stuff like that. And he explained to me why. It was sort of interesting.
And why? So why does he? Yeah. What does he do with the beavers?
He uses he skins them. He eats the meat. And it's sort of like an RFK thing. He eats the meat and he uses the pelts.
Wow, nice. Now, if I was you, Brad, I would have asked for at least a few pelts.
What am I going to do with them?
I don't know. Yeah, Brad, you've been known probably to accumulate a few things that don't have an immediate use.
Well, it's funny because just last weekend, I went on a marketplace thing where it's to the point where I came away with like an unbelievable deal on some stuff. And I mean, just crazy stuff.
Like beaver pelts.
No, it's HVAC stuff. I'm a certified, believe it or not, I'm talking about EPA. I have my official EPA certification for HVAC stuff, and I do that. Matter of fact, I don't hire myself out because you need a contractor's license and that kind of stuff. But I do it for myself. And like perfect example, within the confines of the radio station, we have 6 air conditioning systems, okay? There's two of them here at the studio, there's 2 of them at one transmitter, 2 of them at another transmitter side. I'm about ready to end up with another 2, okay? So the Murphy's Law of air conditioning is that when your air conditioning is working fine, you can call up the HVAC guys and a guy will be there in an hour. on a Friday before Memorial Day, when your air conditioner goes down and your transmitter is barely on the air because it's 120 degrees in the transmitter room, you can't find an HVAC guy to save your life because they're all on their boats down at Lake of the Ozarks, okay? So back in the day, all the broadcast engineers were also HVAC guys, but yet they put all the rules in. You can't buy the parts anymore. You can't buy the Freon, the refrigerants. You can't do it anymore. So I got certified, and I can buy all that stuff. Matter of fact, I was at my supply place yesterday picking up some stuff. I'm about some weekend. I'm doing a little bit of maintenance work on an air conditioner over the weekend. So last week, I bought some test equipment off of Marketplace, and pennies on the dollar. And as I show up, the guy's offering me, hey, you want this? And he was essentially, what happened was he was in business for himself. He owned a company where he did auto repair, but he did a lot of tractor trailer work where he fixed the air conditioners on reefer units. You know what I mean? The big tractor trailers with the refrigerated, and he was shutting down his business because he got hired by a local chain of garages. I won't mention which one, he told me. And he was just shutting down his business. He's going to go to work for them where we have a 401k and, we have time off and the whole bit. And he's literally, hey, you want this? And he kept showing me stuff.
That's awesome.
Okay, I'll take it. So anyway, that's Brad. And so John's right. But the interesting part of it is I'm buying things that I have a use for, but if I were to go out and buy them when I needed them, they would cost me many hundreds of dollars. Of course, yeah. And I paid $50 for it. You know what I'm saying? So,
that's a great deal, right? And especially if you have the time to do it, and when the occasion hits,
well
done.
I don't do it for fun. I do it for necessity. You know what I'm saying?
And I do know. Yeah,
and it saves
you a lot of money.
Saves me a couple bucks here and there.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?